The alien general stood on the command deck of his ship, staring out into the vastness of space. His fleet, a mighty armada of advanced warships, was now poised over Earth. The humans were nothing, he thought. Just another primitive species to conquer and absorb into their empire. The general had conquered countless worlds in his long career, and none had put up much of a fight. Earth, with its primitive technology and unrefined societies, would be no different. The first wave of attacks went as expected. The human forces, scattered and unorganized, were easy targets for the alien ships. The general smirked, watching the Earth's defenses crumble before him. He had anticipated resistance, but this was nothing more than a brief inconvenience. Their technology was outdated, and their tactics predictable. It was almost laughable. But as the battle raged on, the general began to notice something strange. The humans weren't as weak as they seemed. Their military forces, though small, fought with a kind of determination he hadn't anticipated. They were stubborn, resourceful, and refused to back down. The general's smile faltered for the first time. These humans, they were putting up more of a fight than he had expected. As the alien fleet pressed deeper into Earth's atmosphere, the human forces began to fight back with a strange tenacity. Their ships, once no match for the alien armada, now began to show signs of effectiveness. The general watched in disbelief as one of his ships, a powerful destroyer, took a hit from a human missile. It was a direct hit to the reactor core. The ship exploded in a burst of light, sending shockwaves through the fleet. The general's thoughts turned to confusion. How could this be? The humans weren't supposed to be capable of this kind of technology. And yet, here they were, using their primitive weapons to strike a blow against his superior forces. He ordered a counterattack, and his fleet unleashed a barrage of laser fire. But still, the humans pressed on. They were everywhere, fighting back with a mix of desperation and defiance that the general hadn't seen before. His frustration grew. It was one thing to crush an enemy quickly, but this was something else. The humans were starting to organize, pulling together what few resources they had. The general couldn't deny it. There was something to their resistance that made him uneasy. He had expected this battle to be over by now, but instead, it was turning into something much bigger than he had planned. The general's mind raced. The humans were using their knowledge of the terrain to outmaneuver his forces. The cities, once easy targets, were now being defended by well-coordinated human forces. He had thought Earth would fall quickly, but it wasn't. The humans were adapting to his tactics in real time, learning, evolving faster than he could keep up. They weren't just fighting back. They were fighting smart. He felt a shift in the air. It wasn't just the weapons or the tactics. There was something about the humans that unsettled him. It was their spirit, their refusal to give in. He had heard stories about humans, about their history of war and survival, but he had never truly believed it. Now he saw it with his own eyes. They were using every bit of their limited resources to stand their ground. They were not the weak, primitive creatures he had assumed. As the battle progressed, the general could see the tide starting to turn. His ships were taking more damage than they had at the start. The human forces were more coordinated, their attacks more precise. It was as if they were learning from every encounter, becoming more dangerous with each passing minute. The general knew he had to end this quickly before the situation worsened, but he couldn't deny that something inside him had shifted. The humans weren't supposed to be like this. They weren't supposed to fight back in this way. He had underestimated them. That was his mistake. The humans weren't just fighting to defend their world. They were fighting to protect everything they had ever known. And that made them more dangerous than any weapon in the universe. The general felt a sense of dread creeping over him. He had thought this would be an easy victory, but now it was turning into a nightmare. As the battle dragged on, the general began to realize that Earth wasn't the weak, defenseless planet he had believed it to be. The humans had shown him something he hadn't expected: the will to fight, to survive against impossible odds. And it was becoming clear that they were not going to give up. He was beginning to feel the weight of his own arrogance. How had he let it get this far? How had he allowed the humans to prove him wrong? The alien general paced nervously on the command deck, looking at the chaos unfolding before him. His fleet, once confident and powerful, was now struggling to maintain control. The humans had rallied their forces, uniting in a way that the general couldn't comprehend. This wasn't a war for them. It was a fight for their survival. The general had always underestimated the power of a species fighting for its home, its family, its future. And now, it was too late. The damage had been done. The general had underestimated the humans, and that would be his downfall. The tide of battle was shifting. The human resistance was no longer a small nuisance. It had become a serious threat. And as the general's ships retreated, he realized the truth. The humans were not weak. They were far stronger than he had ever imagined. The alien general stood at the window, watching as his fleet retreated. He had been bested by a species he had dismissed as insignificant. His pride, his arrogance, everything that had made him confident in his victory, had been shattered by a single truth. Humanity would never back down. The alien general stood on the command deck of his ship, his fists clenched tightly. The retreat was a humiliation he never thought he'd face. His entire fleet, once so mighty, had been forced to fall back in the face of a species he had deemed weak. His mind raced with confusion and frustration. How had this happened? How had the humans, so seemingly primitive, turned the tide against him? He turned to his officers, their faces grim as they worked to coordinate the retreat. The general's eyes narrowed, scanning the battlefield. His fleet was pulling back in disarray, with a few of his ships still disabled or caught in the crossfire of human counterattacks. The humans had learned something, adapted in ways he hadn't thought possible. They weren't just fighting with their weapons, they were fighting with their will. Every move they made, every shot they fired, showed how determined they were to protect their planet. He had to understand how the humans had gained such a surprising advantage. The general needed to know why his superior fleet had been outclassed by such a small, insignificant species. His mind ran through the sequence of events. At first, it had all been easy. His fleet had moved in, fired their first salvo, and watched as the human defense systems crumbled before them. But now the humans had become unpredictable, and their tactics were starting to catch them off guard. "Report," the general barked at his communications officer. The officer, a tall being with a cold expression, turned toward him. "Sir, the human ships are regrouping. They've begun hitting our flanks, striking when we least expect it. They've also deployed new kinds of weapons, nothing we've encountered before." "New weapons? What are they?" the general demanded. "Weapons that seem to target specific points on our ships, disabling our shields and reactors with precision. They are adapting faster than we anticipated." The general gritted his teeth. This was no longer just about firepower. This was about something deeper. The humans were learning at a pace that should have been impossible for a species so young. It was as if they were catching up to him, pulling the fight back from the edge of defeat. His fleet, which had once appeared unbeatable, was now on the defensive. The general slammed his fist against the command table, his anger boiling over. This isn't how it was supposed to go. We should have crushed them by now. He turned to face his crew. They thought they could win, didn't they? They thought they could take down the mighty forces of the Galactic Empire with their primitive methods. How wrong they were. But even as the words left his mouth, doubt crept into his mind. The humans weren't acting like the usual weak species he had crushed before. They were organized, tactical, and relentless. Every move they made seemed to be well coordinated, as though they had been preparing for this battle for years. A report flashed across the general's screen. The humans had deployed several of their ground forces to fight back against the alien invaders. The general scowled. Earth had been in the midst of a war for resources, and their military was scattered and fractured. Or so he had thought. The reality was far different. The humans weren't just defending their planet. They were protecting something more valuable, their way of life. The alien general's thoughts were interrupted by the sudden explosion of a nearby alien ship. One of the Earth's fighter jets had swooped in at breakneck speed, dodging incoming fire with impossible precision. The ship launched another missile, piercing the alien vessel's hull and causing a chain reaction. Within moments, the ship was engulfed in flames, spinning wildly as it drifted away from the battlefield. How are they doing this? The general muttered to himself, his mind racing. He knew the answer. The humans had discovered something that was eluding him. The power of unity and determination. They were a species driven not just by survival, but by a deep-rooted need to protect what they valued. They were the underdogs, yes, but in the fight for their home, they were showing something far greater than the general had ever anticipated. He had underestimated them. And that would be his greatest mistake. The general watched as Earth's forces closed in. The once retreating human forces were now regrouping in full force. He had thought this was going to be a simple conquest, another star system to add to the empire. Instead, it was turning into an all-out war. The human resistance had turned their weaknesses into strengths. They had turned their lack of advanced technology into an advantage by using everything around them to fight back. The general knew that this wasn't just a battle for survival. This was about pride, the pride of an entire species fighting to protect what they believed in. Prepare the fleet for a counterattack, the general ordered, his voice low but full of urgency. His mind raced through possible strategies, but deep down, he knew that things had changed. He had to adapt. He had to learn how to fight against these humans who had become a force he had never expected. The counterattack began with a volley of fire from the alien ships, but the humans were already prepared. The human fighters swarmed like angry bees, darting in and out of the alien fire. They had found their rhythm. And with every maneuver, they learned more. Their ships seemed to move with an almost unnatural precision, as though each one had a mind of its own. The general's heart sank as he watched another of his ships fall. This time, it wasn't the usual explosion. The humans had disabled the ship's engines and shields, forcing it to drift helplessly before it was struck again and destroyed. He could feel the weight of every loss, every failure. They were slowly being pushed back, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Report. The general barked again, his voice now tense with urgency. The communications officer hesitated. Sir, they've broken through our outer defenses. We're losing ships faster than we can replace them. We estimate that if this continues, our fleet will be gone within the hour. The general felt a cold sweat trickle down his spine. He had lost control of the situation. The humans had turned the tide, and now his forces were in full retreat. The alien general's mind raced, but no answers came. His forces, once unbeatable, were falling apart, and the humans were showing no signs of letting up. He had underestimated them. And now, the very fate of his fleet was hanging in the balance. With a final glance at the carnage unfolding before him, the alien general knew one thing for sure. The humans had shown him that no matter how powerful an enemy may seem, the fight for survival could always turn in the most unexpected of ways. The humans were no longer just a threat. They were a force that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The alien general stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring out into the void of space. His fleet had regrouped, but the damage had been done. His fleet, once mighty and unstoppable, was now in chaos. He had underestimated humanity, and the consequences were far worse than he could have imagined. The battle had turned in a way no one had expected. Despite the overwhelming firepower of the alien ships, the humans had fought back with an intensity that caught the general off guard. Their tactics were unlike anything the general had encountered before. The humans were relentless. Every move they made was calculated, and every shot they fired felt like it was aimed directly at his fleet's weaknesses. No matter how much firepower he threw at them, they adapted faster than he could retaliate. Status report, the general said, his voice cold but full of frustration. He didn't want to hear the bad news, but he knew it was coming. His communications officer, A tall alien with an expression of disbelief turned toward him. "Sir, the human forces are organizing faster than we anticipated. Their technology, while still primitive in comparison to ours, has proven effective against our ships. We've already lost 3 cruisers, and several more are heavily damaged. They've begun targeting our weak points, engines, shields, and weapon systems. They're adapting at a rate we can't keep up with." The general clenched his fists. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He had calculated every aspect of the invasion, assuming the humans would be no match for the might of the Galactic Empire. But now, here they were, fighting back with a ferocity that threatened everything he had planned. "What are their casualties?" the general asked, though he had a sinking feeling in his gut that he already knew the answer. "Minimal," the officer replied, his voice full of disbelief. "They're losing very few ships, sir. They're using their small numbers to their advantage, darting in and out of our fire and attacking with precision. They also deployed ground forces to assist in disabling our weapons on the planet's surface." The general's mind raced. He had underestimated them. The humans weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting to win. It was something he hadn't expected from a species he had considered insignificant. His empire had crushed many species in the past, but this was different. The humans weren't scared. They weren't cowering. They were standing their ground, and every time they fought, they got better. "Have we made contact with the High Command?" the general asked, though his tone was more desperate now than ever. "We've tried, sir, but there's been no response. It's possible their communications are being jammed, or they're preparing for a full-scale counterattack. We don't have any reinforcements coming." The general's mind raced again. Without reinforcements, he was on his own. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized just how big of a mistake it was to underestimate the humans. They weren't just fighting to protect their planet. They were fighting for their very way of life. The general glanced at his tactical display, watching as his ships continued to lose ground to the humans. His pride, his reputation, his fleet, all of it was slipping away. He could see that the humans were closing in, and the closer they got, the more it became clear they weren't going to stop until every last one of his ships was destroyed. "We need to find a way to turn this around," the general muttered to himself, his voice barely audible. But deep down, he knew that there was no turning this around. His fleet was already in disarray, and the humans were learning faster than he could adapt. The invasion had failed, and it was all because he had misjudged the human spirit. The general stared out into space, his mind consumed with the undeniable truth. The humans weren't going to roll over and die like all the other species he had conquered. No, they were going to fight to the bitter end, and they had the power to make him regret underestimating them. He had made a fatal error, and now he would have to live with the consequences. "Get me the flagship," the general ordered, his voice now tinged with an edge of desperation. The communications officer quickly relayed the order, and within moments, the screen flashed with the image of the flagship commander. "General, we're losing ground fast. Our shields are failing, and the human forces are getting closer. We can't hold them off much longer." The general's eyes narrowed as he looked at the commander. "Prepare for a full retreat," he said, his voice cold and deliberate. "We need to regroup. The humans may have won this battle, but we're not finished yet. We'll strike again when the time is right." The commander nodded, though there was a trace of uncertainty in his eyes. The general could see it. Fear of the humans. As the communication ended, the general turned back to his view of the battlefield. He had never experienced such a crushing defeat. The humans had shown him that there were forces far greater than his empire, forces that couldn't be predicted, forces that had the strength to rise, even against impossible odds. The battle was far from over, but the general knew one thing for sure. This fight would haunt him for the rest of his life. The alien general sat alone in his private quarters, staring at the tactical data displayed on the holographic screen. The battle had been a wake-up call, but the worst part was still ahead. He had underestimated humanity, and now they had proven themselves to be far more than just a thorn in the side of the galactic empire. His mind raced, trying to find a solution to the catastrophe unfolding before him. His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock on the door. He straightened, quickly wiping the frustration from his face. "Enter," he ordered, his voice calm but stern. The door slid open, and an officer stepped in. His face was ashen, and his posture was tense. "General," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "the humans have already made contact with our remaining fleet. They're demanding our surrender." The general's fist clenched around the armrest of his chair. He had hoped to recover from the loss, but now the humans were turning the tables faster than he could react. His pride, his authority, everything was on the line. If they surrendered now, it would be the end of everything he had worked for. "How many ships remain?" the general asked, though he feared he already knew the answer. "Only a handful," the officer replied, his voice faltering. "Most of them are heavily damaged. The humans, they're relentless, General. They've already begun hunting down the remaining fleet." The general rose from his chair and paced around the room, his mind working furiously. "We cannot allow this to continue. We cannot surrender to these humans," he muttered under his breath. "We'll regroup, we'll rebuild our strength, and then we'll strike again." "But General, the humans, they're not like the other species we've conquered," the officer said, a note of fear creeping into his voice. "They don't back down. They've proven themselves to be capable of destroying entire fleets. Our forces are shattered, and their resolve is stronger than we've ever seen." The general turned sharply, his eyes blazing with fury. "We will not be defeated by a species that has only just begun to understand the true power of the galaxy. They may have caught us off guard this time, but it will not happen again." He walked to the communications terminal and tapped a series of commands. The screen flickered to life, displaying the image of his top commanders. They all looked battered, their faces showing the wear and tear of the brutal fight, but their eyes still held the fire of determination. "Listen to me," the general began, his voice strong and commanding. "The humans think they've won. They think they've broken us. But they are wrong. We will rebuild, and we will return to destroy them. Their arrogance will be their downfall." One of the commanders, a grizzled veteran, spoke up. "General, I've seen the humans in battle. They are not like the other species we faced. Their tenacity, their willingness to sacrifice, it's something we've never encountered. We've lost too much. Perhaps we should rethink our strategy." The general's face twisted with anger. "Rethink? There is no room for rethinking. We are the Empire. We do not surrender. We do not back down. We strike when we're ready." He slammed his fist onto the table, sending a ripple through the holographic display. The other commanders fell silent, their eyes fixed on him, waiting for him to calm down. After a long moment, the general exhaled slowly, forcing himself to compose his thoughts. "Prepare the fleet. We leave for the nearest shipyard immediately. We'll rebuild, we'll come back stronger, and we'll show the humans that their moment of victory was just a fleeting dream." The commanders nodded, but the general could see doubt in their eyes. He knew that their confidence had been shaken, just as his own had been. The humans had delivered a blow that no one had expected, and it was one that would take time to recover from. As the communication ended, the general sat back in his chair, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. He had been through many battles, faced countless enemies, but none had left him feeling as uncertain as this one. The humans had managed to do what no other species had. They had made him question everything. But no matter how much doubt crept into his mind, one thing remained certain. He would not let this defeat define him. He would rebuild. He would return. And when he did, he would make the humans pay for underestimating him. The silence in his quarters was deafening, the weight of his failure hanging in the air. But as the minutes passed, the general's resolve grew stronger. He would fight again, And this time, he would not be caught off guard. He would learn from this mistake, and he would emerge victorious. The human victory had been hard-earned, but the general was not ready to concede. This was far from over. The general stood at the observation deck, staring out into the vastness of space. The stars seemed distant, almost indifferent to the struggle unfolding below. The battle had been brutal, and although his forces had suffered a devastating loss, the humans' victory had not gone unnoticed. Their fleets had crippled most of his empire's strongest ships, but now it was time to rebuild. His resolve was as cold and sharp as the void outside. They had underestimated humanity once, and that mistake would not happen again. He turned away from the stars, his eyes scanning the room behind him. His officers had gathered in a semicircle, awaiting his orders. There was fear in their eyes. He could see it. He knew they were questioning whether they could truly recover from this blow. He walked towards them, his footsteps heavy, the sound of his boots echoing in the silent room. We have been defeated, but we have also learned. The humans are not the weak species we thought they were. They are resilient, adaptable, and relentless, the general said, his voice unwavering. We will not make the same mistake twice. One of the officers, still visibly shaken from the losses, spoke up. But General, they've already shown what they can do. We've seen their strength in battle, their ability to push through the toughest odds. How can we defeat them now? They know our tactics. They know our weaknesses. The general paused for a moment, letting the officer's words settle in the air. Yes, they know us. But that is their greatest mistake, he replied slowly, his voice gaining strength with each word. They may think they have us on the defensive, but they do not know how we will fight back. We will turn their victory into our advantage. He turned to the display screen, showing a map of the galaxy, dotted with various systems, their locations flashing on the holographic map. We will strike at their heart. We will target their fleets, their colonies, their most protected systems. We will show them that no matter how many times they knock us down, we will rise again. The officers exchanged uncertain glances, but they knew better than to question him. They had followed him for years, through countless campaigns, and they knew what he was capable of. The general continued, prepare the fleet. Rebuild the warships we lost. We will not be passive. We will not hide in the shadows. We will be the storm that wipes away their arrogance. As the officers began to move, ready to carry out his orders, the general's mind lingered on the image of the humans. Their ships, smaller and less advanced than his own, had fought with a ferocity that was rare to see in any species. They had proven that they were capable of thinking on their feet, adapting to unexpected circumstances. They were not like the other civilizations he had crushed beneath his boot. They were different, and that was why he had to destroy them. The general stepped out onto the bridge, his officers following closely behind. The sound of the ship's engines humming beneath his feet was the only sound in the room, a constant reminder of the vast power they controlled. But this power was fragile. It could easily be taken away, as the humans had proven. Alert the fleet, the general ordered. We leave for the human colonies in 2 days. And this time, we will not stop until the humans are nothing more than a faint memory in the history of the galaxy. As the officers dispersed to carry out his commands, the general stood alone for a moment, his eyes fixed on the distant stars. There was no doubt in his mind that this conflict was far from over. The humans had won a battle, but he would make sure they would never win the war. He clenched his fists, his eyes narrowing. We will crush them, and they will never see it coming. The general's resolve was as cold as the dark void outside. The battle had only just begun, and this time, the humans would not have the upper hand.